Story 1. I disowned my father. I don't believe it was nearly as difficult a decision as disowning a child, but it was tough. I grew up in an upper-middle-class, perfect nuclear family. My parents were high school sweethearts. My dad was an operator at an oil refinery, and my mom was an accountant turned stay-at-home mom. I am a middle child. I have a 3-year older brother and a 3-year younger brother. When my older brother was about 10, my dad's drinking got out of hand, and he became extremely physically abusive. A few years later, my mom divorced him after 23 years of marriage because she was afraid for our lives. My dad went off the deep end, started doing drugs, stealing, and was involved in a few hit-and-runs. My older brother, who had received the brunt of the physical abuse, was manipulated into a relationship with my dad for a few years. To a lesser extent, so was I. He seemed to take an interest in us for the first time since we were little, but in hindsight, it was just more manipulation and gaslighting. I won't go into all the details, but my brothers and I eventually discovered the kind of sketchy stuff he was involved in. My little brother and I, who both aspired to get into law enforcement, cut him out of our lives completely. My older brother took a while longer. He was a kid who always just wanted his dad to love him, so he was wearing blinders. He did eventually see the light and cut my dad out as well. A few years ago, my dad was living with his mom. My grandma had been manipulated by him for years, and they had a symbiotic, codependent relationship. She was a prescription addict, and he was an everything addict. My grandma had a reverse mortgage on her home. She was diagnosed with lung cancer and given 6 months to live and moved into a nursing home. My dad kept squatting at her house, despite the bank coming to rightfully claim the home. Cops got involved and he was arrested. My grandma slipped and fell 2 days after moving to the nursing home. She developed a brain bleed and died a few days later. My dad had a seizure his first night in jail and was brought to the hospital, where it was determined he had a burst brain aneurysm. The doctors theorized that the aneurysm was the result of his drug use, and when he was scuffling with the cops during the arrest, his increased blood pressure and jarring caused it to burst. He's now in a nursing home and functioning at about a 6-year-old's level. He has some inkling that he's messed up royally and it is all his fault, but he really doesn't understand the specifics. He can kind of communicate and hold conversations, but they're bizarre and wander all over, and a lot of very strange words make their way in. I visit him a few times per year. I only do it because the person he became with addiction is dead. I believe that karma caught up to him and he's earned his hell. I truly would not shed a tear if he dropped dead tomorrow. He's been dead to me for a decade. I do have some compassion for a sad, confused 58-year-old man who is alone in a depressing nursing home with no visitors. He knows he has kids and a wife. He doesn't understand they're divorced. And sometimes he even knows he has grandkids he has never been allowed to meet. So he doesn't understand why nobody visits him. I've started occasional visits not because I have any interest in having a relationship with him, but because unfortunately, the doctors saved him when his aneurysm burst and we're left with a person who is paying for crimes he doesn't know he committed in a world he doesn't understand. He sometimes cries when he asks to see pictures of that little boy, my nephew, his grandson, and I have to explain, yet again, why he isn't allowed to meet him. He asks me questions about that cop, my little brother, whose name he can't remember. He looks so proud when I tell him that his son is rising through the ranks and just became a K-9 officer. It's like a shard of the dad he was 25 years ago has surfaced, and everything in between only exists as a convoluted fever dream. It tears my heart open as a human to see his suffering, but in a really twisted, sick way, it gives me satisfaction that his actions caught up to him, which makes me hate myself even more than I already did. I doubt anyone has read this. It wasn't supposed to be a novel, but that's how I disowned my dad, then kind of developed a minimal relationship with the ghost of his former humanity that now occupies his body. My heart goes out to people who have had to disown a child. I was extremely fortunate to have an incredible mom and extended family to support my brothers and me, yet I am still damaged from my time with him. Having to choose between compassion and love for a flawed person and your own or your other loved one's physical and mental well-being rips something open inside of you and leaves you permanently scarred. Story 2. I am not a parent. I have never disowned a child. My parents disowned my oldest sister. I am the youngest of 3 girls. My oldest sister had a horrible relationship with my father and blames me for getting in the way of their relationship. She had her first baby to spite him when she was 16 years old. My father refused to give her money because she met a deadbeat child predator and got pregnant again, then again, and again. She constantly put herself and the deadbeat before her kids. Dad would send money to the girls for Christmas and birthdays and never heard a thing. He finally gave up. She is 30, has 6 daughters, and lives in a mobile home in North Carolina. We had not seen or heard from my sister until June of this year. My oldest niece contacted me asking to come to Florida, where I live, for the summer to get her and her sisters out of the trailer. I agreed, contacted my sister, and she agreed. I set up plane tickets and organized the rooms they would stay in. When they got here, they were completely disheveled. Their clothes were visibly dirty, they smelled foul, and they were so covered in lice that my white towels stained gray from removing them. My niece informed me that they had been without water and electricity for 6 months. They live in a 2-bedroom mobile home with holes in the roof, and there are bugs and rats everywhere. As a family, we decided the girls were not going back to North Carolina. We told my sister to come to my parents' house in Florida to get her life together and back on her feet. She refused because the deadbeat is not invited. Ironically, she found out that the deadbeat is cheating on her. She confronted him and he kicked her out of the trailer. The deadbeat said, "I would rather be homeless than live with you." My sister now works for the dollar store and does not pull her weight with the kids. At least the girls are safe now. I never really finished my point with the story. My parents had disowned my oldest sister when she moved to North Carolina with the deadbeat for 6 years until my niece reached out to me. I had never even met my 2 youngest nieces until this event. I regret turning my back on my sister. I really hate her and what she put her babies through, but if we had stayed in her life for those 6 years, we maybe could have prevented this. Story 3. My siblings and I have stopped interacting with my oldest brother. We found out that years earlier he had molested at least 2 boys. He was an adult at the time. He showed no remorse and turned the story around to say that those boys were at fault. It was so disgusting to watch someone you grew up with treat people so poorly and show such a blatant disregard for others. The good news is that the remaining 4 siblings have become closer, and we now are able to appreciate the good we see in each other. It's true when they say that if you could pick your family, it would look much different than it is. Story 4. Not me, but my great-grandma. This story is really sad but also interesting, so I thought I'd share it. She was a young Creole teenager. French Creole was her first language, and she was a quarter to half black like me, with tan skin and loose brown curls. She was born in Florida, but when things started getting worse for black people in Florida, her family relocated to Texas. For those who don't know, Creole people tend to play heavily into colorism. Although they are definitely mixed race, they prioritize light-skinned people. The looser your curl, the lighter your skin, the more white you look, the better. Her parents had high expectations for her to marry a wealthy, light-skinned man who would take care of her. Instead, she met my great-grandfather, a poor, dark-skinned man jumping from job to job working for farmers and trying to make a living. The 2 of them fell in love. They were just teenagers. Her parents threatened to disown her if she continued seeing him, and like a rebellious teenager, she refused. They wanted her to do better. She wanted to be in love. They might have broken up eventually if she didn't get pregnant. But she did, and that was the end of it. Her parents basically said, "You've ruined your life," and disowned her right there. The whole family disowned her. No one would speak to her. Aunts, uncles, cousins, not a single person stood up for her. So she had no choice. The 2 of them moved to California so he could get a job picking oranges. He built a house. They had their first daughter. She was 16. She never saw her family again. Story 5. My parents disowned my oldest sister. She always struggled growing up more than us. She became a teenage mom with a bad older boyfriend, partied a lot, but my parents helped her a lot. They do okay for themselves but had a no co-signing rule for all 6 of my siblings and me. Still, they co-signed for her house so she could get a head start. She didn't pay the mortgage for almost 3 years before my mom got served in front of all the other nurses at her work. My parents worked tirelessly to try to work out deals where my sister and her family kept the house and got some leniency, but to no avail because my sister never showed up for court dates. During this time, she paid $12,000 for in vitro fertilization and got pregnant with her 5th child. When my mom demanded some of the money back, she accused my dad and my brother of beating her sons when my parents took them to Disney World. He didn't, and said she'd file a police report if he asked for money again. They kept asking because it wasn't true. She awkwardly joined us for Christmas and punched my brother in the face during the meal for humiliating her oldest son by asking him if he wanted to work at my brother's company for good pay. Her oldest son is in and out of jail, and my brother was trying to help him after his release, but her son said he didn't want a job and got mad. She then called the cops and told them the same brother had illegal guns in his truck, and they came on Christmas night and searched his truck. No guns were found. Needless to say, she is not welcome anywhere near any of us, and my mom still cries about it, but refuses to talk to her again. Story 6. My mother and her sister were both adopted into a great family. Recently, my grandfather fell ill, and we were told to prepare to say goodbye, so the family gathered. My grandmother has had a hard time with her memory since she had a brain hemorrhage, but she welcomed my aunt into her home during this tough time. While my grandfather was in his final week, Wendy, my aunt, took my grandmother's ATM card and proceeded to spend well over $1,000 on herself and get herself a motel room. She also attempted to steal their car. When my uncles found out, she basically disappeared. After my grandfather passed and his funeral was all sorted, my grandmother went to an attorney to write Wendy out of any inheritance she would get from their estate when she passes. She didn't press any formal charges because the whole process would have been lengthy and more painful for her. She didn't need the extra stress. I'm pretty sure one of my uncles also threatened Wendy to make sure she stayed away from my grandmother from now on too. Story 7. My parents didn't disown me. I was just a weird mistake. My mother never wanted a child. She left after a few months. My father was a single parent and ended up in prison for life without parole when I was 14. I finally met my mother. She was a police detective by the time I moved in with her. She threw me out after 2 months. I am 30 now, and life is typically a little weird around the holidays, but I always get a good laugh when I tell people that my father is in prison for life and my mother is a police officer. But then they get super awkward when I tell them that no, it's not a joke. Took a long time for me to come to terms with it, but I know now that none of it was my fault. This grew much more than I expected. Thanks for all the kind words, everybody. Story 8. My father said my mother's issue was she had too many children and it gave her some kind of brain fever, much like a dog that loses its mind after having too many puppies. My mother said my father felt trapped by me. He was planning to leave when it was just my 2 older brothers, and then my mother got pregnant with me and he felt obligated to stay. Now that I'm an adult with 2 kids myself, I think I realize that both of my parents are just extremely mentally ill and incapable of loving anyone, including themselves. Story 9. My ex-wife disowned my son. We both married young when I was in the military. We were high school sweethearts. She became pregnant 6 months into our marriage. I don't think she connected with him at all after he was born. The most she did with him was Instagram photo shoots where she painted herself as #1 mommy. When he turned 3, I left the military. A year after that, she ran for the hills. I remember it like it was yesterday. I sat down with her at a local restaurant to talk divorce plans. We split all of our finances and material items down the middle. We finally got to custody for my child, something I dreaded to discuss because fathers never gain custody in my area, and she told me, "I want absolutely no responsibility." I was taken aback and I asked if she was sure. She was. That one sentence hurt me more than anything else that happened during that time. My biological father wanted nothing to do with me, and now I was seeing it happen with my own child but with his mother. I received full custody, and she married within a year afterward. She had another child too. Her parents try their best to be a part of his life, but she still does her best to avoid him. He's 7 now and used to it, but I know it weighs heavily on him. It's tough, but it's life, I guess. I just woke up and saw all the upvotes, messages, comments, and awards. I want to say thank you so much. I didn't expect this level of response. I don't usually share something as personal as that. My child is a very awesome kid who has shown great resiliency beyond his years. He has rolled through the tough times better than even I. I can just hope he doesn't question his worth because of what his mom did. I know I question mine due to my own father leaving, and that has left scars that will not heal. Well, thank you all again, and you all have a wonderful day.